All right, guys, here we go. We're going to take a ride on the train to Living History Days.
Bye, Dave.
Good to see you. Hey friends, it's good to be with you again. We are in a really neat place today. This is one of my favorite examples that we do here at all of Living History Days. This is the blacksmith shop, a place where they heat metal up and bend it and make things. And I don't know how to do this, but my friend Dominic here is a blacksmith, and he's going to teach us how to make things out of metal and what kinds of things they can make out of metal with the things that you see right here.
Well, good afternoon. How are we doing today? A blacksmith makes things out of metal. And let me give you an example. This is a meat fork. Now this meat fork started with some other shape. And the blacksmith was able to change the shape of the metal. And they do that with a hammer, with an anvil, and some heat. So the blacksmiths were one of the most valuable tradesmen in any village, because they could make just about anything out of metal, and people needed things out of metal, whether it was to eat with or whether it was tools. Blacksmiths would make all the tools. Right? Most tools are made out of metal. So plane. Hammerheads, hooks. If you want to hook a pot above the fire, that's called an S-hook. S-hook, S-shaped hook. Nails. Blacksmith would make all the nails. And putting a cabin together was a whole lot easier to do with some nails.
So Dominic, I'm thinking about some of the other places that we've gotten to visit. We went and saw a cabin, and it did have nails that held it together.
Yep.
It had a hook that was over the fireplace where they hung the pot to cook with.
Yeah, let me show you an interesting hook. Let's see, it's this one right here. Now, this hook was found in a cabin and dated to about 1860. And this would be pounded into the wall like this, and you could hang meat in a meat locker. And this would be blacksmith made. You can always tell if it's blacksmith made if the pieces are square, like if the pointed object is square. Like these nails, they're all square in cross section.
Most of our nails today are round. Those are different, aren't they?
Yeah, they're made out of wire in an industrial process. The blacksmith, because the blacksmith works with a flat surface underneath and a flat surface of a hammer, it's easy to make the metal square. You can make it round, but it just takes a lot of little teeny hammer blows to get those edges off.
So let's take something really simple like a nail. How long would it take to make a single nail?
29 seconds.
29 seconds. So a half a minute. So if I needed a box full of nails, like say 100 of them, that's going to take almost an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, yep. And I made a nail in 29 seconds once. That was my record. But a good blacksmith could make 1,000 nails a day.
So that would be, if you ever see the big boxes of nails, that'd be 2 of those boxes. It'd take all day to make them.
Yeah.
So Dominic, my question would be, and maybe these guys are thinking it, why not just go down to the hardware store and buy a box of nails?
Well, back in 1850 here in Indiana, there were no hardware stores, but there was a blacksmith, and if you wanted it out of metal, the blacksmith could make it for you, or the blacksmith had it. He was a very important tradesman. And sometimes they'd work in, blacksmith would work in iron, sometimes they'd work in copper. If you wanted a copper bowl. A blacksmith who worked in copper, you might call a coppersmith. A blacksmith who works in iron, because iron comes out looking like this, it's kind of black, they call him a blacksmith.
So these copper bowls, I see a whole bunch of little dimples in it.
Yep.
Is
you
that-
can count them. I'd like you to count them.
I don't think I can count that high. That's been,
Well, every one of those is a hammer blow, and it takes a lot of little hammer blows.
that's been hammered a lot.
A lot. Yep.
So I'm guessing a blacksmith, if you would grab his hand to shake his hand, did he have a pretty strong grip?
He sure did. You know, you don't want to. You got to be careful when you shake a blacksmith's hand. So I want to show you a little bit about the way blacksmithing is done. So I'd like to show you the way a blacksmith moves metal around. Now, moving metal is not easy. So we're going to move some clay. All right. So I have a couple of pieces of clay here. I'm going to put this on this thing. This thing is called an anvil, of course, a hammer. And I'm just going to whack this clay, and I'm going to give it a nice flat blow. Now you see the metal got squished this way, it got squished this way, it got squished in every direction. And usually we don't want to do that, but you can see how the clay was deformed by the hammer blow. So I'm going to take this other piece of metal and I'm going to use a blacksmith trick. The blacksmith trick is to use the other end of the hammer. And when we do that, I'm going to come down this way, and this kind of a blow is going to push most of the metal this way and this way. It's going to a little bit this way, but most of it's going this way and this way. So I'm elongating this piece when I hit it this way.
Almost like stretching it out.
Yeah, just stretching it out. Now I can also do it this way. I can take the hammer down this way, and I can get the same kind of effect. I can push metal this way and this way. So depending on the way you use the hammer, whether you use this end, that's called the peen, or this end, you can move the metal in different ways. Now, this is pretty soft, and steel is not so soft, or iron is not so soft. So to get it soft, we have to use this thing here, which is called a forge. The forge burns coal, and you can get the metal to over 2,000 degrees. And typically we're working at about 1,700 degrees or 2,000 degrees.
That's really, really hot.
That is really, really hot.
So
That's right.
what do you have to do to protect yourself from not getting burned?
Well, the easiest thing is to work with a long piece of metal, because this end can be 2,000 degrees, and this end is still comfortable. So that's why we like to have long pieces of metal. If we have a small piece of metal, if we have to hold a small piece of metal, then we use something like this, which is called tongs. It's sort of like a pair of pliers. So you can hold the metal like that. We don't like to handle small pieces of metal because they're easy to lose in the fire. But long pieces of metal don't get lost. Now, I'd like to show you how a blacksmith would make a very important tool. For instance, a pair of tongs. How does a blacksmith make a pair of tongs? Okay, so we're going to put the clay away. Now, what we have here is a piece of metal that you could get from the metal store. Now, the metal store, if it was in the 1700s here in Indiana, the metal store would be in Detroit somewhere, and you have to put it in a canoe and go down the rivers to get here. But in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, it became easier to get iron. So if you want to make a tong out of this, you're going to use the hammer and the anvil. And the first thing that you would do was make this. And you do that by putting the metal this way and hitting it this way. Now, nothing happens because that metal is hard. But when you hit it, then you get this. And that's the first step towards making a tong. Now the second step is, first step, second step is to lay this down here at the edge of the anvil so you don't disturb that, and you hit here in this part and flatten it out. So let me just put that up here. It's doing it this way, hitting here to create this.
And so you do all that when the metal is really, really,
Really
hot.
hot, right? So now we just did this with these last hammer blows. Now, the next thing we might want to do is to make an identical piece. You see these pieces are identical?
Yeah,
Right?
they match.
They're identical. So if we lay these down, you can see that, so we get a pair of tongs.
Yeah.
Now they're identical, right?
Uh-huh.
But because we've rotated one, this gets rotated that way.
They go together.
They work together. Okay. So the next thing we might want to do is to punch a hole in it so we can fasten these two pieces together. Right? So that's important.
So you just get your drill out and you drill a hole, right?
Yeah, no drills, no drills. What we would do is take a punch like this. This is called a punch. We get this thing hot. We put this punch in there, and we whack it real hard. Right? And then we go over here to this hole and turn it over this way, and we hit it real hard, and that piece of metal just comes right out. So that's punching the hole. Now this handle over here, this is pretty clunky. Right? If you want to get this nice and thin, then we take this clunky handle and we try to thin it out and make it longer. Right?
Uh-huh.
Lots of hammer blows to elongate this piece of metal. Now this piece of metal has a hole, and I've done a little bit of work on the jaws over here. And like I said, you make an identical piece. So these two pieces are identical. Right? Now we can put these like this. We got holes in there. We take a rivet, put the rivet through it, and now we have a working pair of tongs.
How about that?
Right? That's the basic idea. In this tong over here, I'd cut this off like that, and then I'd smash this thing down, and that'd never open up. So that's how you make a pair of tongs.
Maybe a tool that some of our friends have used. Maybe they've tried a pair of pliers before.
Yeah,
Kind of the same thing.
Just like a pair of pliers.
Or even like maybe the scissors that you have in your art box at school. And that all came just from a plain old piece of metal.
Yep.
That's amazing. So you can make about any tool that you needed, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, how about we do something with hot metal this time?
That sounds
All
fun.
right, so what I'm going to try to do is make a nail. And here's an example of a nail, blacksmith nail. It's square in cross section,
Uh-huh.
and has a head on it. So it's a nail with a head. So,
Wow, Dominic, that's a big hot fire.
Yeah.
What's the thing that you're cranking there?
this is just a fan, or it's called a blower. So it's a hand cranked blower, and it's blowing air down underneath the fire, right underneath where you see those big flames. That's where this blower is coming out. And it helps the coal to burn, and burns really hot. And if you look in there, that temperature in there is probably Oh, it's probably 2,500 degrees, maybe more. 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a really hot fire.
Right.
They might have learned in science class, you guys might have learned about fire. It takes what? It takes air and it takes heat
And fuel.
And so when you crank that, that increases the air,
Yep.
which increases the heat as it burns the fuel, right?
Right, and the fuel is the carbon in the coal. You can use charcoal, like the kind of thing you put in a barbecue grill. You can use gas, natural gas, or propane as fuel.
Could you do it with wood?
Yeah, you could. It would probably be better to convert the wood to charcoal.
So burn hotter?
Yeah, and cleaner.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to take this normal piece of round stock. This is steel, and I'm going to put it in the fire. And you notice I'm not wearing gloves. So it'll take maybe 2 minutes for that to get hot the first time, and once it gets either an orange color or a yellow color, so we're talking about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, that's the temperature that I want to work this at.
So you tell the temperature by the color?
Yes. Ooh, that's
Wow.
yeah, that was a little bit white at the top.
How hot is that?
White hot is about 2,200 degrees.
Wow.
And so this is maybe a little bit of yellow, and then turns to orange, and then red. So you're exactly right. We determine the temperature by the color. So this part over here that's cherry red, that's about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're looking now. It's all cherry red. So that's all 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. In a minute, you won't be able to tell that that's hot at all.
But it'll still be hot, won't
It'll
it?
still be over 1,000 degrees. And I'll tell you, 1,000 degrees is very dangerous. This part over here, however, is cool enough to handle without gloves. And we can do a really nasty experiment here. All right, how far up do I want to move my hands?
I wouldn't go much farther.
How much further?
Really?
That's getting warm. Yeah, that's about as far as I want to go. But you see why we handle long pieces of metal, because we can handle this safely, even though that's still over 1,000 degrees. All right, we're going to put this in. And what I'm going to try to do is put a point on it, like this. I'm going to try to put a point on it. Now, because that metal is already at 1,000 degrees, it doesn't take too long for it to get hot. I'm going to use the hammer, forging hammer, and the anvil. And I'm looking for a nice orange color. We'll get it even just a little bit hotter. Now I can see some white in there, so we're talking about 2,500 degrees. That's good enough. Let me work on this now. Now we've put a partial point on it. You can see we're getting there. The metal cools off, and I was working on that maybe 20 seconds.
So you have to keep reheating the metal.
I have to keep heating it, that's right, because as it cools off, it gets hard again, and it doesn't move when I want to hit it with a hammer. But it doesn't take too long to get it heated up again. Okay, so I'm in the process of putting a point on this, and let me get this warm again.
That fire really gets hot.
Yeah, that's pretty hot. When that came out, the tip was white, and the tip is where it's going to get the hottest in the fire, and it'll cool off the fastest, which you also saw. So the object is to get a nice, consistent, tapered square, and it has to fit inside this thing, which is called a nail header. It's going to help us put a head on the nail. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark this. That's a cutting tool. I want to cut it right about there. So I just put a mark on it. You see that mark? All right. Now that'll allow me, I'm going to heat it up again, because even the cutting is aided by the metal being hotter. It's called hot cut.
Hotter makes it softer, right?
Hotter makes it softer. I'm going to switch numbers. Okay, now I'm going to cut that. My mark. There's the mark. And I'm partway through. Cut it from the other side. And I don't want it to go all the way through. I don't want to cut it all the way off. I think that's good. Now, I'm going to put this in the fire, and I need to get this part hot because I'm going to put the head on the nail now. All right, so it's almost cut all the way. But you see, if I cut it off completely, I'd have a small piece of metal. And I don't want to do that because it's so much easier to handle it this way. Now, this is a sharp tool over here. We always want to keep the sharp tools out of the way because you can cut your finger off. But this is a nail header, and it helps us put the head on the nail. It has a square, yes, it has a square opening, and it has sort of a domed top. We're going to put that on the top of the anvil. We're going to go back to the forging hammer. Okay. So I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to separate it, and I'm going to put a head on it. All right, so now here's the separation. This is sort of sticky metal. And that's the separation. I'm going to put this over there, and now comes the head part. Okay, so now you can see the head. Let me cool this off. Alright, the nail just come out here. And there's the nail. Got a little head on it. It could be straight, it could be just a little bit straighter, but we can fix that. Alright. That's a blacksmith-made nail. Remember, they have edges, 4 edges, so they're square in cross-section. And that's the way a blacksmith makes things out of metal.
So when we build a house and we put it together with nails all the way through, it takes a lot of work just to get one nail, doesn't it?
Yeah, at least 29 seconds worth. You saw me do it in a little bit more than 29 seconds. So that's how a blacksmith works. A little bit about the history of blacksmiths. Blacksmiths have been around for a long time. Even in Greek mythology, Roman mythology, there were blacksmiths. In fact, the Roman blacksmith god, his name was Vulcan. Maybe you remember volcano?
Uh-huh.
All right, Vulcan. It's
fire.
Right, fire. Things that you do with fire, and just like that.
Uh-huh.
In history, you might learn about the Stone Age. That's when the tools were made out of stone. But then came the Bronze Age. And that's when the blacksmiths figured out how to make things out of bronze. So an entire age of human history was named after what the blacksmiths could do. They could make tools, they could make weapons out of bronze. Mm-hmm. The swords, the shields, made out of bronze. Changed the course of human history until the blacksmiths figured out how to make things out of iron like we did here. That's called the Iron Age. That's about 1000 BC, the Iron Age started. Another age of human history named after what the blacksmiths could do. Then there was the Industrial Revolution around 1800 or so when manufacturing switched to machines. And that was the beginning of the end of blacksmiths. Blacksmith is sort of a trade that's slowly dying as machines and machine tools and lathes and milling machines have replaced them. But today, there's a blacksmith, a specialized blacksmith called a farrier. They make horses for shoes. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the last of the blacksmiths that you would typically find in any community. And then there are other people who are called artist blacksmiths. And they're using these same techniques to make works of art. So that's blacksmithing today and blacksmithing throughout history. I hope you enjoyed this.
Let me make some connections for our friends, because we've been to the cabin, and the cabin was held together with some nails and some different things. We also looked at some farm equipment. You guys might remember the plow, and you might remember Tom talking about the plow that was made by a blacksmith.
Yeah.
We also spent some time over at the sawmill, and we talked about the blade on the sawmill. That also would have been things made by a blacksmith, right?
That's correct, yep.
So really, if we went back 100 or 200 years, the blacksmith was one of the really important people in the community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, all the fittings on the horses, the things that you put in a horse's mouth, and you hold the carriages together, and the steering mechanisms, and parts of the wheels, all made by the blacksmith.
Very, very good. It looks like this would kind of be hot, dirty, sweaty work sometimes, though.
Well, it is. It is. But it's fun. I enjoy it. I have a lot of fun with it.
Very good. Dominic, thank you for sharing. Thanks for letting us come visit your blacksmith shop. Next time you guys use anything that's metal, maybe think about where it came from. Have a great day.
Bye.
Today at Living History Days. I'm so glad you came on this trip with us. I hope you learned some things today. I hope it was a lot of fun. I hope you'll come back and see us again sometime. And maybe someday you could come out here in person and get to ride the train and see some of the very neat things we've gotten to share with you. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you.